So a number of years ago, I answered a phone call one afternoon. There was a young man on the other end of the line, and he began our conversation by saying, before we start talking, you need to know, I have a gun in my lap when we're done talking. I intend to use it. This is a man who knew nothing of his life but abuse of every kind from every direction, physical, sexual, emotional abuse from everywhere, family, friends, and neighbors. Now he's calling me on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline, what you now know as 988, feeling useless. There is no reason to go on. I'm only here for people to take advantage of. I have the privilege, there's 8 high schools in the northern Illinois area at this point who bring me in every semester to talk to their sophomores when they're studying mental health. So what I want to present to you is exactly what I present to them, so you know what I'm telling students. And I think the message is absolutely applicable to parents as well. So I did have the incredible privilege of spending 20 years. I volunteered 4 hours every week on the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. 20 years, 4,000 hours. I talked in excess of 11,000 people in that period of time. And it taught me a great deal about how difficult the human journey is. It's hard to be human. If it was easy to be human, how much would we learn? We learn some of the most incredible lessons in our lives through the times that we suffer. But sometimes that suffering gets so overwhelming that people think about ending their lives. Do any of us really know who we are? I have come to the conclusion that that's a lifelong journey, to figure out everything about ourselves. Even at my age, I still hope there are things that I can learn about who I am that I can live into the world. So do we really know who we are? I don't think we do entirely. I don't think we ever do. Like I say, I think that's a lifetime journey. I found this image. I show this to students, and I say, is this a meaningful metaphor? They never really know. And every student will shake their head when I say, we never know what other people are going through, right? There's how many people in this building today? How many hundreds of people? And how many of those people do you think feel a little bit like this? Right? But this is what we show the world. I say to the students, if you get up some morning and your day goes downhill the minute your feet hit the floor, you get out of bed, but you get to school, you open the door, and one of your friends said, good morning, how are you? Even though you feel like this, what do you say? I'm good, I'm fine. We all do that. We all put on masks. We live in a culture that would have us believe that if we're suffering, it's because we screwed up. And that's generally not the case. It's hard being human. I get calls on the suicide hotline all the time from young people who would say, you know, my life is a mess, but all of my friends on social media, their life is great. What's wrong with me? And I would say, are you sure their life is great? Because the fact of the matter is most people are putting on a mask. We all go through difficult times. There's another interpretation for me, though. After spending 20 years on the suicide hotline, when people would call me on the suicide hotline, they would be honest. That's what my life looks like. I've been abused my whole life. Now I've got a gun in my lap. When we're done talking, I intend to use it. And the incredible privilege for me for 20 years and 11,000 phone calls, people would call me feeling like this, and I'd get to help them see some wholeness in themselves that they couldn't see in the moment that they called. What an incredible privilege that was for 20 years. So why is it people think about ending their lives? Mental illness plays only a very small role on the suicide hotline. The fact of the matter is, people think about ending their lives because of what I call mental ill health, not mental illness. What I mean by mental ill health, I mean being human. It's the kinds of things that all of us experience: confusion, grief, anger, sadness, loneliness, isolation. These and other kinds of things that we would call just ill health. Sometimes these get so overwhelming that people think it'd be just easier to end the pain than to go on. The young man who called me with a gun in his lap, feelings of worthlessness. Nobody would care if I was gone. These are the reasons why people end up thinking about ending their lives. It's just because sometimes the human journey gets so difficult, it would be easier to end the pain than to go on. Got a call from a young woman in high school. She started our conversation by saying, I looked in the mirror this morning. I hate my entire life. I hate myself. I hate it all. Don't misunderstand. If you're answering calls on a suicide hotline and people call and say, I hate myself, I hate my life, that's not unusual. But I would always ask, is there something about your life, some small thing that you might appreciate or love in some small way? And virtually everybody would say, something that I could work with to talk with them about. But this young woman, when I asked that question, is there anything about your life that you appreciate? No, I hate it all. I asked her if she had friends at school. She says, I'm blessed. I have some really, really wonderful friends at school. So I asked her a very simple question. If I asked your friends, what would they tell me about you? She paused and very quietly she said to me, they would tell you I care about them a lot. Really, do you love them? More than you can imagine. Are you kind? I try to be kind with everybody. She said, I often fail, but I always try. Are you generous? I asked her. She said, I'd give anything to anybody. If they needed it, it was my power to give. I said to her, these are the things your friends see in you, the kindness, the generosity, the empathy, the care, and the love. Can you see some of those things when you look in the mirror in the morning? You're making the world better and more beautiful every day through the things that you do. Could you see some of those? And then she said something that I repeat to every student that I talk to. She said, that helps a lot. She said, thank you. I forget to look at myself through the eyes of the people who love me. Those are the only people in this world who can tell us who we are. A young woman at another school a couple of years ago said, I spend a lot of time worrying about all the students in school that I don't like. I worry about what do they think of me. I said, is that helpful? It's not. The only way we can find out who we really are is to look at ourselves through the eyes of the people who love us. I love this image. All we ever see of ourselves in this world is a small sliver of who we are. Other people see so much more of who we are than we can see in ourselves. Sometimes you don't recognize how beautiful you are until you see yourself through the eyes of someone who truly values you and loves you. I love this image. All of these stories are stories about people who the story they're telling themselves about who they are is the wrong story. The young woman who looked in the mirror, I hate everything about my life, it's the wrong story. She's living a beautiful, wonderful life and making the world a more beautiful place. The young man, and I'll tell you more at the end of our time together, who called with a gun in his lap. I'm worthless. I don't matter to anybody. That's his story. It's the wrong story. I got a call from a young man sitting in the front seat of his car, the parking lot of a retail store. And he begins our conversation by saying, I'm a horrible, evil human being. I don't deserve to live. Turns out this young man had been in the war zone in Afghanistan. Now he's a veteran. He's left the army. He's back here in the United States. He spent some time telling me what it was like to be in the war zone in Afghanistan. You don't want to know. You don't want to know. I can't imagine how I would be different if I lived through what he lived through. I'm not a doctor. I can't diagnose, but I wouldn't be surprised if this young man came back suffering from post-traumatic stress. If you know anything how difficult it is to go from a war zone to being a civilian, that is an incredibly difficult transition. And it wasn't going well for this young man. His girlfriend left him. He had no family. He had a job that he hated. I'm guessing this young man is living on an emotional edge 24/7, calling me from the front seat of his car in a parking lot of a retail store. I'm a horrible, evil human being. I don't deserve to live. That's his story. I asked him why he would say such a thing like that about himself. It turns out he had just been inside that store. And as he was trying to check out, something happened to push him over that emotional edge that he lived on. And in that moment, he turned to the woman behind him in line, and he said some very cruel things to her. Now he's calling me from the front seat of his car a few moments later in the parking lot. I'm a horrible, evil human being. How could I have done that to that poor woman? She didn't deserve the things that I said. If that's who I am as a human being, I don't deserve to live. I don't want to live even one more day. So I'll ask you what I ask all of the students. How many of you would agree that this young man is not a horrible, evil human being? And all the hands go up. Everybody sees it, but he can't see it himself. How many of you have ever made a mistake that you're sorry about? If you don't raise your hand, you're lying, right? And all the students, because I say, and all the hands go up as well. We all make mistakes as part of being human, right? Do the mistakes we make define our character? Well, mistakes don't define our character. Now, if we do something intentionally bad, that defines our character, but a mistake doesn't define our character. And that's what I asked this young man. I said, do you think you'll do this better next time if it happens again? He said, I certainly am going to try. I don't ever want to do that to another human being. This young man's, his story, I'm a horrible, evil human being, is the wrong story. He's a kind, generous, caring, empathetic young man who made a tragic mistake. And we both wish that he hadn't made a mistake, but it was a mistake. And it doesn't define our character when we make a mistake. It defines our characters. Do we learn from it? Do we become better human beings as a result? The story we tell ourselves is often the wrong story. We get confused about the world in our lives for two very important reasons. Now, this is true for every human being on the planet, all right? For all of us, for all of the students that I talk to, I mean, I get the privilege of talking to like 3,000 or 4,000 students every year at these schools across northern Illinois. Two reasons. First of all, we experience only a fraction of the world around us. We miss most of the world and what happens. But that's all we have. We use those fragments that we do experience to create stories, and those stories are often incomplete and misleading, because they're based upon fragments of the world around us. So I always said we experience a fraction of the world around us. You know, that's the example. How much of the world, your brain is bombarded by almost an infinite amount of sensory information every day. How much of it do you actually take in? A very, very small percentage. The human brain, no human brain can take in everything we experience. If you actually took in everything you experienced, you'd be paralyzed. You couldn't do anything. You'd be overwhelmed with sensory information. So we only take in a fraction amount. And so we miss most of the world. We miss things about ourselves as well. Do you ever have trustworthy, caring people who see things in you find it difficult to accept? People who say wonderful things about you and you're in denial, right? Oh, it's my husband, it's my wife, it's my brother, it's my sister, it's somebody, and they're just being polite. They really don't know what they're talking about. I ask the students this, and at least half the hands go up. Yes, I'm in denial about wonderful things people say about me. So the question I ask is, imagine how you'd feel if they're right and you're wrong. Because if somebody says something wonderful about you, to just deny it flatly means you're missing something about you that other people see. And they may not be 100% correct. As I say to the students, if a relative says, you know, you are the most extraordinary basketball player since whoever, Michael Jordan, that may not be a fact, but they are telling you something that they see in you about your athletic ability and the grace that you provide on the basketball floor. Or when you're on the stage in a drama, you are the most incredible actor or actress since Meryl Streep. Maybe not a fact, but they are telling you something that you need to hear. And you need to take that in and not just deny it. Because there's something about you that they see that you need to hear. So we experience only a fraction of the world around us, and we use those fragments to create stories that are incomplete and often misleading. So all we have is little fragments of the world that we experience, and we turn them into stories. In 1958, Gaetano Canizza first drew this. We call it Canizza's triangle, green triangle and a white triangle. Which one is larger? How many think the green triangle is larger? How many think the white triangle is larger? How many think they're the same size? Yeah. It's a story you've made up. There's no triangles there. There are 6 independent shapes. They're fragments of the world. Gaetano Canizza found a way in 1958 to arrange them and to fool your brain into seeing triangles that don't exist. We make up stories about the world all the time based upon fragments. A number of years ago, my wife and I were at a resort, and off the lobby was this shop, a little coffee shop, and this sign was over the door. What's the shop called? Cafe Lounge. And you might not have seen it immediately, but that's what it was called, the Cafe Lounge. Is there an F there? There's steam. The graphic designer was brilliant. He arranged steam into helping you see an F that's really not there. And where's the steam coming from? coffee cup-ish. There's a couple of squiggles, but we see a coffee cup. But I'm here to tell you that it gets much more pervasive than that. Most of you already know where I'm going with this one. If I asked you to tell me the story about the person who owns this vehicle, and then tell me the story about the person who owns this vehicle, how many of us would write two different stories? Guilty as charged. Is it right? Is it fair? We don't know. You can't stop your brain from doing it. The human brain is brilliant at what's called pattern making. We see little bits and pieces of the world and we turn it into a story. And we believe those stories. Here's what I can tell you without a doubt. Whatever you write about the person who owns this vehicle, you might get a couple of things correct about them. Most of what you write about them will be wrong. And the same thing is true here. We make up a story about the person who owns this vehicle. You might see a couple of things right about them. Most of what you believe about that person will be wrong as well. But we don't do it just about other people or graphic designs or triangles. We do it about ourselves. Here's what I ask the students. I say, when you go to your next class, imagine that as you're walking down the hall, there's a small group of students who are talking and laughing and having a really good time. And as you walk by, one of them turns around, looks right at you, and starts to laugh. Think you might tell yourself a story about what's going on in that circle? And the students say, well, yeah, I guess they're all talking and laughing about me. I'm a laughing stock at the school. We begin to tell ourselves this whole story about what's wrong with us. But come on, we do it as adults as well. How many times have you seen something out of the corner of your eye, or you heard something that somebody said at work, right? And you believe it's about you. And it's some kind of negative perception that they have about you, and you begin to question your own validity, and you begin to question who you are. Who was it who said, how could I let the mountain be a mountain and not a comment on my life? But we do that. We take little bits and pieces of the world and we make up stories about ourselves. And those stories are often, well, they're always incomplete, and they're often wrong. So what do we see in ourselves that's often wrong? I ask the students, how many of you believe that you are sometimes overly self-critical? I ask you the same question. How many of you would admit that you are sometimes overly self-critical? Beat yourself up in a way that you know is unfair. Say things to yourself that you would never say to another human being. And the students say the same thing, absolutely. I'm often overly critical of myself. So I say, next time you hear that voice that's beating you up, that's being unkind to you, imagine how you feel if that voice is wrong, because it probably is. It probably is. So we get confused about the world because we miss most of it, and we use those little fragments that we do experience to tell ourselves stories. So we miss so much that is true, we believe so much that's not, we often misinterpret the world around us. Let me tell you about a high school classmate of mine by the name of Joe Connell. Joe Connell and I lived in completely different universes, if you will. He was an athlete, eventually co-captain of the football team. I mean, Joe Connell had it made, right? He was the guy in high school. Everybody loved him, everybody knew him, everybody laughed at his jokes, right? You know that person. I just assumed that Joe floated through high school and never had a problem. I was that science and math nerd that nobody cared about or even knew. So Joe and I knew Joe. I mean, it was a fairly small school. I didn't dislike Joe. I was probably jealous of him because he lived this incredible life that I maybe wanted. I don't know. Fast forward 30 years to our 30th high school reunion. I caught up with Joe at the bar over a glass of wine or a beer, I don't recall. We got to talking about our high school experience. At one point, Joe looks at me and goes, Roger, you don't understand. I was the loneliest kid in that school. Wait a minute. How's that possible? You were the guy. How could you have been the loneliest guy at school? Well, it turns out Joe was a very quiet, introverted person who came from a school. He didn't know anybody when he got there. He felt very alone and lonely. I was totally wrong about Joe when I was in school. And then just this past summer at our most recent high school reunion, I took the opportunity to sit down and have dinner with Joe and ask him about his life. What an incredible man he became. He hated school, but he ended up at the Culinary Institute in New York, decided he loves cooking. He became an executive chef, and his last job He was in charge of all food service and catering at the University of Texas at Austin. He and his staff would create thousands. I asked him, what made you so successful at that? He said, I'm really good at motivating people. So this man who lived in a completely different universe than me when I was in high school, he and his wife are now very close personal friends. And of course, yes, his wife, he married the homecoming queen. How perfect is that, right? But they're still married and now very close personal friends. I never would have guessed that would be possible when we were in high school. I tell all of the students that, and I say, next time you're in the hall and you see somebody in the school that you either dislike or you're jealous of them, especially if it's a classmate, find them at your 30th reunion and ask them about their high school experience. And I guarantee you that what you think they're experiencing today in high school is not what they're experiencing. Their story is something very different. But we believe we know other people, and it's true for all of us. We make up stories about other people in our lives, at work, in the neighborhood, other parents of students. We make up stories about people all the time, and those stories are always incomplete and generally wrong. In the end, everything that we know, everything that's up here in every one of our brains about ourselves, about other people, about the events of our life, it's always based upon incomplete and imperfect information. All of it. It's all stories. Everything that you know about the world and about other people and even about yourself is a story you're telling yourself. All of it is a story. And if those stories become negative about yourself or about other people, it's time to realize it's a story and there's a different story that could be told. But it's all stories. I get asked all the time, since I spent 20 years helping people who are struggling on the suicide hotline, how do we help people who are struggling? So I want to take just a moment to do that. Notice I say ask about the story that they're telling themselves, because in almost every case, and I've told you a couple of examples already, the story people telling themselves about who they are is the wrong story. Ask what they might be missing about their life that's true. That's what I said. We miss a lot about the world. We miss a lot about ourselves. So ask what they might be missing about themselves that's true, and are there things they believe about themselves, stories that they're telling themselves that are not true, especially those negative stories, beating themselves up in a way they know is unfair. But notice in every case I said ask, because there's two caveats I want to share with you when you're reaching out to help somebody, especially if it's your own children. What you believe doesn't matter. But we tend to want to fix people. If somebody comes to you and says, I look at myself in the mirror, I think I'm really ugly. What do we say? Oh, no, that's not true. You're really beautiful. You're really handsome. I think I'm really stupid. I failed that physics test. No, you're not stupid. Look at all the things. Well, we want to tell them what we believe, and we want to tell them why they're wrong. Go back to the young woman who called me and said, I look in the mirror in the morning, I hate my entire life. If I had simply said to her, I'm sure you're wrong. I'll bet you're really cute. I'll bet you got a lot of friends. I bet you're really smart. I bet you're really generous. Would that have helped? Never helps on the suicide hotline. What you believe doesn't matter. All I did was ask that young woman questions. Do you have friends? What would they tell me? Are you kind? Are you caring? Are you generous? And every time she asked one of those, what I call authentic questions, and what I mean by that, it's a question where you don't know the answer and any response is okay. Because that was always true in the suicide hotline. I'd ask a question that I didn't know the answer to, and anything they told me was okay. I'd work with it. So that's how you help people who are struggling. It's not what you believe that matters. It's only what they believe, and you only find that out by asking questions, what I call authentic questions. Every time that young woman answered one of my questions, are you kind, are you caring, are you generous, are you empathetic, I knew what she believed about herself. Didn't matter what I believed. And so then finally, finding personal healing, and this is true for not just, by the way, the keynote speaker was wonderful. I agree with everything he said, and there's a lot that really meshes well between what he said and what I'm saying here. But if you're suffering, the first one is reach out and break the silence. If you're suffering, don't suffer in silence. Reach out and tell someone. As I say to the students, you've got faculty members who care about you and counselors, people at home. If nothing else, call 988 or text 988. You don't have to be, the vast majority of people who call the suicide hotline are not suicidal. They're just struggling and they need somebody to talk to. the hundreds of people who called me who said, you know what, I've just told you something about my life that I've never admitted to another human being. And it just feels wonderful to told somebody in the world that I'm struggling. And you didn't make fun of me, you didn't say I was crazy, you didn't say I was a horrible human being. So reach out and break the silence. And as I say, in those dark personal moments, if you're suffering from any of these things or others that I call mental ill health, and then I look at every student, I say, if you ever feel as if you don't matter, as if nobody would care if you are gone, you are wrong. Because I have lived this journey with too many families who lost loved ones who thought nobody would care if they were gone, and they were wrong. Ask yourself those same two questions. What are you missing about your life that might be true? And do you believe things about yourself that might not be true? Then I'll say the same thing to you that I say to them. If you can't answer these accurately, find that person in your life who can, who knows you and loves you and can see what's beautiful in you that you can't see in that moment. But find that person. So I will take you back then to where we began this conversation. A young man called me and said, I have a gun in my lap. When we're done talking, I intend to use it. A life of abuse, that was his story. I have no value in this world. It's the wrong story. In the midst of our conversation, I asked him if I could share with him the story that comes from, it's in all the religious traditions, but the first version I heard is from the Hasidic tradition. It's very short, it's very powerful. Disciple asks his Rebbe, why does the Torah tell us to write the holy words on our heart? Why doesn't it tell us to write the holy words in our heart? And the Rebbe says that's because as we are, our hearts are closed. So we write the holy words on our heart, and there they stay until one day our hearts break and the holy words fall in. Is a powerful story, the wisdom that is only available to us when our hearts are broken. We don't want to have a broken heart. But how many of you have ever had a broken heart? And regardless, as I say to the students, even if your heart broke because you lost a beloved pet, you learned something about the human journey that you can use to help the next friend who loses a beloved pet. There's wisdom available to us only when our hearts are broken. I asked that young man, how many times has your heart been broken? He said, thousands. I could never count. He said, that should never happen to a child. I would take that away from you in an instant if I could. But have you learned something about the human journey that you can use to help others? And that young man began to tell me story after story about how he was in his community saving the lives of other young men who were suffering the way he suffered. Only he understood the depth of their sorrow. I think he began to understand that while life had stolen his childhood from him, it had left him with this huge compassionate heart that he was literally using to save other young lives. He began to realize that he had value in this world, and he told me he put the gun away. I've written a couple of books. They're on my website. I won't bore you with those. Be kind to yourself. Thank you all very much. I appreciate it. Have a great day.